Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 185 with Dave McNair. I had a great chat with Dave and we talked about so many things, including his journey from audio and into mastering, why mastering engineers work so quickly, how bass and vocals are paramount in a mix. He talks about mastering with mixing in mind and vice versa, correcting a good mix made with bad monitoring. Dave talks about his journey in hi-fi, the relationship between hi-fi and pro audio, moving the studio into his living room and his current setup, when to go out of the box and when to stay put, leaving lots of headroom out of the box, staying healthy, why you shouldn't be afraid of failure, working on music that you like and not giving up, and everything in between. This was a great conversation. Dave's an amazing mastering engineer, and he shared so much wisdom on this episode. So I'm really excited for you guys to listen to my conversation with Dave McNair coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone, if you're a music studio professional who wants to build deeper relationships with better clients, former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, has created some free educational resources for you. The link is in the show notes below, so go check it out. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Dave McNair. Dave has been a professional recording engineer, mixer, producer, audiophile, and for the last 20 years, a multiple Grammy-winning mastering engineer. After years of residence in New York City, Los Angeles, and Austin, he now resides in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Dave and I connected on the internet a while back, and we've been chatting on and off, and he graciously agreed to join me on the show. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Dave.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me. I'm a fan of the podcast, actually. I would say that most of the ones that kind of cross my path, I check out, and there's always great. You have great guests, and you have great information from those guests, and I really like how they really cross section a lot of different areas, and everybody has a lot of different things to say, which I think is cool. I consider myself kind of a lifelong learner, and I'll check out the podcast even if I only get one or two little tidbits off somebody. I think that's valuable. So,
Yes. Well, I'm so glad that you are a fan
Totally.
and are learning from that. I feel the same way. I learn something from everybody who comes on the show. And I was also happy to hear that you met Sam Moses from the Attack and Release show through my podcast.
Sam and I've gotten to be good friends, and I reached out to him because I heard him on your show. So, yeah.
That's crazy to me. And I heard you on their show, actually.
Okay.
That was like a fun full circle for me to that was a great interview also. It was
Those
fun.
guys are great. Yeah.
Amazing. So I'd love it if you share, I mean, your story is clearly a long one because you've been doing this for a long time and you've had many accolades and many amazing records. So if you don't mind giving the audience a bit of a TLDR on your origin story, how it started for you, how you end up kind of getting into audio and I guess moving towards mastering.
Okay. I'll just make it super short and condensed. I grew up totally into music, and my first introduction was I played classical guitar from 11 to about 16. And I really enjoyed classical a lot and got deeply immersed in that and thought that was going to be my path. Things changed. I got to use electric guitar when I was about 16, found some guys to get in a band. We did a demo, which I thought was really interesting at some studio. And after trying my luck in college, like 2 or 3 different times, different majors, I just kind of was like, I can't put away the idea of being, a musician. So something didn't work out, and I kind of was disenfranchised with that. And so I decided, all right, I'm not going to be a musician, but maybe I could do something musical. And my dad was the one that suggested that I be an engineer, audio engineer. And so we got together and we found a school that seemed like it was a cool thing. And so I went to the Institute of Audio Research in New York. I was about 22, I think. And I moved from my little town in Texas, Corpus Christi, to New York and went to the school for a little while. And my whole career, I've been too antsy. I think it's ADHD, which I have an extreme version of. I couldn't sit still to finish the whole program. And so I took the summer off and I was doing sound for a band on Long Island, which was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. I was selling hi-fi at a store in Brooklyn that sold really good, super high-end hi-fi. And I got a job in a demo 8-track studio, 1 block from Madison Square Garden. So I was doing all 3 of those jobs. It was pretty hectic.
That's like where all those like rehearsal studios are.
It was
like, what was that?
across the street from the Black Bill. It was very near that. There's one really big rehearsal complex on one of the avenues.
I've been in those.
Right. Me too. This studio was in a building just south of Madison Square Garden, but on an east-west boulevard. And there was a big rehearsal complex actually across the street too, called Planet Sound or something. Anyway, so I worked there for a long time, and that was very formative. I really learned a ton of things about recording because, in those days it was all live recording. I mean, you would do overdubs, but the genesis of any session was some amount of people playing together. And we had a guy that would visit to come in and do demos every now and then, who was great. And he was an assistant. He was a full-time guy at Electric Lady Studio, but had worked at this little demo studio that I worked at. And he would come in and his stuff would sound amazing. And I couldn't understand how his stuff sounded so great with the same gear that we had, And like the best mic in the place was a Beyer M500 ribbon. Everything else was like 58s and RE20s. And I don't think we even had a condenser. But he kind of showed me how you make stuff sound good and his preferences. And so I learned a lot from that. Anyway, long series of moves, blah, blah, blah. I get into studios, bigger and bigger studios and learn more and learn more. And I was always the type that would preferred being like the chief engineer at a smaller studio than being the assistant at the big studio. Like I just didn't, for some reason, I wanted to call the shots. So I learned a lot in Austin, Texas, when I was an engineer at a place there called Arlen. I learned how to, work on 24-track and, put together a good recording. They had good mics. And it was the first, large format console. This is probably like, 84 maybe. And things just kind of churned. I talked about this in other podcast interviews, and I ended up in New York at the Hit Factory, and that was a very good learning experience. I worked with a lot of great people there. I was kind of on staff as just a staff engineer. And then I went independent, moved to LA, worked on a bunch of projects out there, and things, kind of churned and things were good. But in the late 90s, I started to see the writing on the wall because the budgets were getting smaller and smaller. It was harder and harder to get a band that I thought was really good, a record deal, so I could get a budget to work. So the gate was kind of closing. In other words, the labels all through the 90s, they started to want to go for just the sure thing. And I don't know if it was because they signed all these bands during the grunge era and only so many panned out, or what the deal was, corporate ownership, the labels. Even as late as like the early 90s, there still was a fair amount of labels that were not absorbed and amalgamated into, now there's like 3 labels, really 2. But there were still a lot of labels, but the consolidation was happening. The budgets were getting smaller and smaller for acts that were not considered a sure thing. And then Napster happened. So I was like, well, that's the end of this ride. I got to get out of this. It wasn't full blown danger, but I could see exactly where it's going. So, and by that time I had a kid, and I was married, and I was like, okay. So I made a conscious decision in the late 90s to shift to mastering. And I was pretty excited about it because it was a new thing. And in the beginning, I thought it would be kind of easy because it seemed like it was just, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And, the more I got into it, the more I realized that my initial naivety about it was maybe not as true, but that enabled me to just go, oh, I'll just start a whole other career at age 40 something. It's just how hard it can be. It's not as hard as mixing, so, and to this day, I don't really exalt mastering over any other element of the production. It's really not that big a deal. It's like, if the song is as compelling as it is, especially now that people mix like really, kind of hot and very already sort of finished sounding.
Yeah.
Probably 30% of the stuff I work on, you just put it out. like it is, and it's doesn't need me. But the additional, one more little QC to check that
Yep.
they're fine is cool, and I realize the benefit of that, so I'm happy to do it. But the projects I really like are the ones where it's already great, the mix is great, nothing really needs to change, but it's not been particularly hyped, and it's left room for me to kind of do something that I really love.
Yeah.
I love those projects. So
Hopefully many more to come.
yeah.
So in your journey of like becoming a mastering engineer from like a regular audio engineer, did you have any mentors or anybody who kind of led you down certain paths, taught you things that you maybe needed to learn?
Well, Scott, actually, who you had on recently, I probably learned more from Scott than anybody else.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. I'm trying to distill what he might have said. There was two significant situations, more than two, but a couple that stick out in my mind. Well, so what happened is so now I'm in New York. It's like late 90s, early 2000s. And of course, none of this was easy. It's like, I'm not like independently wealthy. So like every time I did this, I'd have to just sell all my shit and just take a bus to, like it was not, I'm making light of it, but I don't want to lean too much on the difficulties of it, but it was freaking hard to get to this point. But the thing was, I was just absolutely obsessed with this. So when I hear a podcast when somebody says, look, don't get into this unless you really want to do it, that's more true than I think people realize, and more today than any other time. But so I'd had a series I started in my apartment in New York with, the kids, it was like, I had a living room for a little while, and I was like, okay, it's not going to work. So I found a little place down on Canal that I shared with a friend of mine, and I found another place I shared with somebody else, and then I cruelly said, I want the whole space to myself because I'm here more than you are, whatever. So I don't remember what the deal was, but so then I had a little place to myself in like a old office of a recording studio that I'd been doing a lot of mixing. There was a lot of crossover where I would still do some mixing and occasionally some recording because that kind of, paid the bills. But I was determined to do the mastering thing. Like I would do a session at, Avatar or Power Station or whatever it was, and just do my thing. And then, at some point in the session, I talked to like guys in the band or like the assistant and stuff. It's like, I'm mastering now. If you guys ever need anything you want mastered, like I don't really want any more of this recording work, but give me some stuff to master. But I also have said this before in interviews. I had at least the awareness that I did not. I even though I felt like I had a pretty good idea of kind of what I was doing, I had at least the awareness to not call on favors of all of the bigwigs that I knew to send me. Like I could have called a bunch of producers. Hey, I'm mastering now. Send me some shit. But I was like, I'm not really good enough yet. I don't think I'm gonna beat Bernie or Bob Ludwig or whatever. So I tried to kind of operate under the radar and do a bunch of relatively unknown stuff to learn, to get my stuff together. And I had a couple of early producers in those days that kind of wanted to give me a shot and do stuff, but I was just learning a lot. Another guy who was very instrumental to helping me was Brad Blackwood. I learned a lot of stuff from Brad. He was extremely helpful, and we met on the internet. We used to talk a lot, and he was very, very helpful in a lot of ways, technical and conceptual. And I used to do a lot of those like internet 10 people, 12 people master the same song and then check it out and critique it. I used to do a lot of those, and I'd be like, oh, I'm better than some of those guys, but I'm not there yet. Anyway, fast forward to, I heard that I think I've got my stuff at home at this point, because I would like get a room together and build something and then have to move in a year. I was like, fuck, I got to again. So I heard just that Scott was looking for somebody. So I didn't really know Scott. But I called him up. He's like, yeah, let's talk about it. So I went into his place and was like, oh, this is like the real deal. You've got real gear. You've got a room that sounds correct. And he was very super helpful and super kind. And like, you can work evenings and weekends. bring your computer in, and so that you don't have to interface with any of my shit, and you just plug it in, and then you can do your thing, and I'll take X amount of the billing. And I wasn't billing much at that point, and he knew I was trying to keep food on the table and pay rent for my family. So it worked out pretty good. And that just kind of snowballed. And then at some point, he's like, you know what? I think I'd worked there like a year, maybe a year and a half. And by that point, he helped build another room in his place that he rented. There was enough space, so I had my own little room.
This before you owned MasterDisc?
Before MasterDisc proper. And
yeah.
So then Scott said, you know what? I'm going to buy MasterDisc because the guy wants to sell it, and it's a little bit kind of run into the ground. I think I can kind of save it. And where I started, I've got this kind of thing about it. And, at that point, there was like 4 or 5 engineers working out of his place. It was like him and maybe 4 of the guys. Randy was still doing some assisting for Scott, but was working out of his room doing his own projects. I had known Randy Merrill. I met Randy when he was the night tech at Avatar. And
wow,
he's like the number 1 mastering dude in the world now. He's like, so anyway, so Scott bought MasterDisc. We moved everything over there. I had Greg Calby's old room, and things are churning. I'm grinding. Things are happening, and that was a pretty successful period for me then, because I had gotten some bigger name clients, or gotten clients earlier that had hung with me, and their careers started to blossom. Had like 2 number 1 Billboard hits in those days. Might have had an album chart topper. I don't remember, but things were kind of happening, and I by no means thought I had everything all dialed in. I was still learning. Randy and I used to get together after hours and play around with all different kinds of concepts, and like, hey, I found this out. And then the person who's actually my booking manager now, Danielle, who was kind of out of the game a little bit at that point. I think she was teaching yoga full time or doing a variety of things. She called me and said, hey, somebody from Sterling just called me. They're looking for a guy to take a room because one of their guys is leaving. So I was like, all right, that sounds good. But at that point I was kind of already about ready to leave and do my own thing, because as Scott needed to do to keep a business running, he was taking more and more of the billing. But it seemed like the more I billed, either I made the same because the house needed to take more because, they own most of the gear and they provided services. And I was like, okay, I can see how this model is valid, but it's kind of an old model. And I don't know how much longer this model is going to stick around, really. I don't think it's as valid as it used to be. So I'm going to take all my stuff at home, or I'm going to find another room or whatever and do my own thing. And that was not scary to me because I had been an independent mixer engineer my whole career. So I'd had a manager, but I basically didn't rely on any employment situation, or didn't rely on having, an IT guy or an engineer guy. It's like I had to figure out all my own shit. So I knew I'd kind of missed the camaraderie of, a bunch of rooms and a bunch of people that I liked and sharing ideas, but it was kind of, and then this call to Sterling came through and I thought, all right, I'll go over there for a while and see what that's all about. And those were good learning years. I learned a lot of stuff from George Marino. I learned stuff from Ted. I learned a lot there. But one of the important things I learned is that you really have to work quickly. And you don't have to work quickly because you've got too much work to do. That's the thing that kind of starts you on that path, is when you're starting out and you have all the time, and you enjoy doing it, you can work on it for a long time. And you might have just a basic sense that, well, if I work on it too long, the bread's going to be in the oven for too long. It might be detrimental. But when you have enough miles and enough, 10,000, 20,000 hours or whatever, and you have to get to where you can work. You have to work quick because there's no other way, because you've got 3 projects you got to do today and there's a shitload tomorrow. And you just kind of like, you take a deep breath and go, okay, that's that feels good. And boom. And then when that stuff goes out the door enough and you get good client feedback, you go, okay, well, I don't need to spend hours on each tune. And so, and then the next stage is you find out that not only do you not need to spend a bunch of time on it, it's better if you don't spend a bunch of time on it. And I also knew that because I had the privilege of being a mix engineer and sitting in the session with all the greats. Like I would take my album, the producer would be like, you want to go to the mastering session? I would be like, hell yeah, I'll go. So I many times was Brian Gardner and Chris Bellman and Bob Ludwig and Ted and, Greg Calby and all. And none of those guys spend more than 10 minutes on a tune. It just doesn't happen.
Fuck.
10 or 15 minutes. It just, if Ted struggled with the tune, that means that he played it 3 times.
No shit.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And part of that, there's 2 components to that. One is experience, but digging deeper into the experience, it's accumulating many different little conceptual tools. And that's easy to see. Like, okay, I need to do it long enough to figure out all these different plugins and all these different strategies for all these different situations. But then there's even one above that goes, this mix is never going to really be all that. It's a waste of my time to try and make it into something it's not going to be.
Yeah.
And that is like Jedi level. That's like, do what you can do and do it expediently. But if it's going to be a black hole of trying to remix this guy's thing, you just fucking make it as loud as you can make it and go on to the next project. And I don't know how many people you'll hear say that, but that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I spoke with John Greenham, who did the Billie Eilish record and the big one, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling me, it's like, there's no time to really think about it after that. It's just, that's it. So it's done, And I remember being like, whoa, that's crazy. Like this massive record, that was just kind of like, it's almost like an afterthought. It's like, okay, yeah, I did that. And then, okay. And that's it. Because like you said, next day you got a bunch of other projects lined up and there's no time to think about whatever else.
Absolutely. But I also don't want to give anybody that listens to this the impression that the experienced people don't take it right as far as it can go. Because I won't give up on anything until I've really feel like I've taken it as far as it can go. Now, it may only take me 20 minutes to get to that point, but half an hour in an extreme situation. But I might try all of these exotic things to get a whole bunch of stuff happening, only to go, you know what? That's not really making it better. I'm just going to blow off all that stuff and little 10K, little 100 hertz and make it. How loud can I make this fucker? And that's it. But it still takes that amount of time to figure out I'm not going to do anything.
Right. My question for you is like, I totally resonate with the whole going with your gut and or it's like almost like, okay, this makes sense. This is what we can do. Like, do you think we'd be better off at all stages of the production process, not just the mastering process, if we kind of spent less time? Do you think a better mix would be an hour and a half versus 6 hours? Like what are your thoughts?
When I mix, and I learned a lot about, I improved my mixing from all of the mastering I did because I listen differently when I mix. And being an experienced mixer has definitely, in the very early days, jump-started me on mastering because I was very comfortable from the word go in mastering, manipulating the shit out of it with all kinds of multiband and EQ and this and that. Like, I didn't do that. Remember, this is like in 2000. There wasn't like a bunch of tutorials on YouTube telling me, well, you got to use multiband. I was like, well, this is what I use to mix to get it to do a certain thing. So I'll just use it to master. And that was an age when people didn't, it was like some bass and treble and make it loud, maybe a little compression. And I was so comfortable using compression and EQ and all different other kinds of procedures in mixing that I didn't have to really learn that so much for the mastering. What I didn't have available to me is I was still listening not as holistically. I was still listening kind of like I listened for mixing, where I was circulating around all the little parts. And it was not second nature for me to just hear the whole thing. And that took a while. And I finally got to where I could just kind of hear the whole thing and then focus on what I was going to change. And after doing that enough, the next time I had a mix project, which is only like every year and a half or every 2 years, now I'm doing the mixing like I'm doing the mastering. Like I'm listening to the entire thing most of the time. And I'm quickly focusing into small elements, like what do I want the bass drum to sound like? But I never spend more than a minute on it. Like little top, okay, let's get this whole thing in shape, so then I can maybe look at some. So if I had, let's say, a well-recorded, I didn't have to do a bunch of editing and everything's already, arrangement is cool and all that. When I mix, I don't have a template, but I kind of have some very go-to kind of things that I'll instantiate. I just use EQ3, Pro Tools EQ3 90% of the time. And there's only a couple of compressors I use, and I don't stop and think about, well, maybe this other compressor, there's just 2 compressors I use. It just needs to be compressed or not, or it needs to be compressed a lot or a little bit. Like I really boil my choices down into fewer choices. And then, because the idea is I want to get the statue chiseled in the correct proportion as soon as possible. And then I'll think about the jaw and the nose and stuff. You don't want to go down the black hole of these little minutia. And what happens is when you get the statue chiseled rapidly, not only is the proportion better, but you don't have to do as much super detailed work. And so what I've found, and I've had a couple of guys that I kind of mentor a little bit on mixing, is the 2 most important things, the difference between the mix sounding like a killer mix and just a good mix, is the vocal sound and the bass instrument sound. And when you first start out mixing, those are 2 things that you spend the least amount of time on. You'll spend tons of time on the drums and the guitars and the keyboards and the percussion and the effects and this and that, even if you got the vocal up there. And then you go I got to make this vocal sound better. And you kind of make it sound a little bit better. And then the bass is like, well, do I have enough bass? And I'm like, the first thing I do once I get this thing roughed out is dial in the vocal just to a T. And the bass instrument, whether it's synth or bass guitar, it has to do a very specific thing. I want to hear every note in every frequency. I want it to go all the way down. I want it to not interfere with it. I spend the most time on crafting the bass instrument and the lead vocal more than anything else. And if you get those 2 things completely nailed, it almost doesn't matter how the other stuff sounds. It'll sound like a super high. If the song is great and the arrangement's cool, it'll sound like a hit.
Yeah. I totally resonate with that. Luckily, those are kind of things I definitely focus on a lot personally as a bass player.
Yeah.
And also just like the vocals, everything, right? Like got to make sure that vocal is totally dialed in.
Yeah.
I barely spend time on keys and guitars these days.
Cool.
It's like maybe drums more than than what you're saying.
Well,
but
I will.
But it's
I will spend time on drums, but I don't explore a lot of options. I just kind of do what I feel needs to be done to get it to that point. Maybe toward the end of the process to be like, you know what, I can't hang with that snare. I got to try a different sample or something. But that's almost an end game.
Yeah, it's an afterthought compared to the big picture stuff.
Yeah, because how many times have you spent a lot of times crafting a mix and you've given everything kind of equal measure and equal whatever, and it feels pretty good, and then you come back the next day, you're like, fucking sounds like a reverb plugin demo, and where's the vocal? Like, if you get it together really quick, you'll avoid that. And the other thing I do too is I don't use any effects until toward the end.
Really?
I keep it bone dry up until I'm at 85 or 90%. And then I go, okay, the static balance it's pretty killing. Now let's see what some little effects will do. and then I try some little effects. And you'll find when the static balances are really happening and everything's hitting the way you want it to hit, the effect is truly an effect and not something that has to be part of the mix to keep it working. It's an option, like, and if you say, okay, well, I want this to be kind of a Lana Del Rey vibe and all that, don't start with all that reverb. Start with it bone dry and get it really happening. Then when you reverb up stuff, you'll find I just need to put some reverb on the female lead vocal and then maybe on one other element. And so I can keep all of the clarity of everything, but it sounds like it's in this dream. Even with just this tiny bit of verb here and there, you're like, oh, now it's really scary. But if you start out like, we're going to Lana Del Rey, you put a little bit of reverb on everything, you just screwed yourself.
Right. Well, you're going to have a lot of mud to swim through.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. I think about doing that next time I mix.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's a good method. It's a good to try and get it. And the other thing I used to do is I would save a little bit of headspace, like a mix that comes together pretty quick. I'm like, all right, I'm not done, but I'm feeling good. I'm at like 90%. I've got some headspace left to try out this new plugin or this new technique, and see if this is cool. Maybe this will be this thing I put on this percussion, this new little reverb thing everybody's talking about. But I would be very specific in where I was in the process so that I didn't take my attention too far away from the end goal of the finished mix.
Yeah.
So balance.
So basically, it's that mastering mindset, right? It's I don't remember who told it to me first like this, but I really resonated with it. It's like if you're like, because like as a mixer, right, as not a mastering engineer, if I like try to master my own stuff, I'm listening to like what lifting the subs does to the bass, but I shouldn't be listening to that in a mastering setting, because in a mastering setting, you're just like you're supposed to be feeling the whole forest, not the individual trees, and just like, is the energy improving? That was kind of like the way that somebody put it to me, and it resonated with that. Because like, yeah, how can I master a mix if I'm thinking about what the master process is doing to individual elements of the mix? I'm already dead in the water,
Well, run that,
so to speak.
Yeah, clarify that just a little more. Just say that to me.
Yeah,
time.
Sure. So it's like if I'm a mixing engineer and I'm going to try to faux master my mix, and I'm like dealing with, let's do some like EQ on the whole mix. And let's say I boost the subs. So rather than saying, does the mix feel bigger or better, I'm saying, oh, now the bass feels muddy. I've already kind of lost the game, because now I'm focused on a mix element. And then you're going to be thinking about all the things that you do in the master, how it pertains to if you messed up the what's the word? The authenticity of the mix, right, so to speak.
Right.
Whereas, like, probably that's not a smart way to think about the last stage of the process.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
it's like the forest versus the trees kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I do master my own mixes mainly because I don't mix very often. If I mixed all the time like I used to, I wouldn't master it. But my like one or two clients a year or every year and a half or something that send me stuff, they want me to master it, and I've tried to get out of it. They're like, no, we want you to do it. So what I kind of figured out is that when I mix, I'm going for the most low end I can get without messing up the thing. And because I'm hearing it over and over, and because my ears get a little sensitized to the top end, I naturally have a tendency not to make it as bright as it would be. So my mixes are dark and bass heavy. So
got it.
I usually cut low end when I master my mixes. And I don't do it because I think back to when I was mixing it and I intentionally went too far. I do it because, I haven't heard the tunes in 2 or 3 weeks so that I can hear it fresh, and I put it up. I go, oh, I don't know who mixed this, but there's just way too much again 30 hertz of them. But when I'm microscoping at the very end of the mix about how much low end I can get with the relationship between what's acting as the bass drum and what's acting as the bass instrument, I'm going to err on the side of more. And sometimes when I'm mastering, I'll leave that alone and go, maybe if I just kind of raise the top, it'll sort of balance it out. Or sometimes I go, well, when I was mixing, I had no concern for loudness. So now I need to kind of get it loud. I wonder if I can just pound the limiter a little more with just a little shelf down of this low end. Like it's a totally different thought process. And if I get a mix from someone else that I'm mastering, I want it to have as much low end. In other words, my mastering process is kind of like, what would I do if I was mixing this tune? Well, I would have added a shit ton more low end. I can tell you that. So how much low end can I add to this mix that I'm mastering? I go, well, that's too far. It's away from the original intent, but how can I? So I really think, and I don't do it as much, and I don't do it with everything, but I do it with an overall thing of, like after I get the overall thing feeling pretty good, pretty happy, and I go, I would have, for extra credit, I was like, I wonder if I can get away with just a little tiny bit of compression that puts a little smack in the snare drum that I would have put in there if I would have mixed it, Got it. And I go, no, it's too detrimental to the whole thing. So we're going to leave that alone, But so I won't let anything that I'm going for individually be detrimental to the whole thing.
I gotcha. So you do hear, like, it's like you hear the individual elements of the mix, but if it takes away from the gestalt of the master, then you'll forget about it. Absolutely correct.
If I go, okay, there's a reason there's not much low end on here because it just doesn't work for this tune. So this tune is not about that thing. So and that takes me 3 seconds to go, okay, I'm not like looking for 10 different things to try and get this low end that I'm visualizing. Like you see these threads on Gearslot, like what's the best low end EQ or what? Well, I mean, if the tune can take it and not mess up, any EQ is the best low end. It's like you're not going to find a magic EQ that puts the low end in this mix when there's not that much low end if it wasn't intended to have any low end. And if their monitors had tons of low end and they just messed up, any EQ can just put a bunch of low end back in it. Like if the mix is truly good, because, I'll get stuff where I go, well, this mix is really pretty good. Everything's balanced, but their monitors are out of whack. So I'm just going to inversely reproduce the curve of their monitors and it'll sound killer. So like, I don't care if I have to
that's crazy.
Lift a shelf of 50 hertz 3 dB or find their room boomed at 80. I'm going to add 4 dB at 80 with a Q of 1.2. I don't care,
whatever it takes.
Because what'll tell me that I can get away with that is it doesn't radically change the vibe of the mix. It's leaving the same relationship between the bass drum and the bass guitar, but now it doesn't sound like there's a suck out at 80 hertz or whatever, or
right, because you're not affecting the balance. You're just changing the EQ tonal balance.
Right, like if you go, ooh, I wish there was a little more 80, and you boost 80, and you go, the only question at which I would say, yeah, that's happening, is if it equally affected the bass instrument and the bass drum instrument. If you go, ooh, that's making the bass drum feel good, but the bass is too loud. He's like, well, okay, I can't really do that. That's how they intended it. So it's not because there was a weird hole at 80. That's just how they heard it. So I'll leave that alone. If you go, I'm just not feeling the low end on this record, but I hear the bass drum sounds cool and the bass seems to be there. If you lift the whole thing 50 hertz, 70 hertz shelf, 3 or 4 dB, and you go, well, they still sound completely in the same perspective and it's not screwing it up. Well, they had way too much low end on their monitors when they mixed, but they skillfully blended the elements together.
Right. Man, it's so crazy to like be able to see the details in the mixes like that.
Yeah.
I guess that's like the reps, the years of doing it.
Yeah, people don't use NS10s quite as much, but I can instantly peg an NS10 mix because it's pretty lacking at energy around 1500 or 1700, and it could use a healthy dose of 200, and it's usually very bright at the very top because NS10s don't really have any air. There's nothing above 10 or 12K. So if you wanted air, you're going to like lean on 12, 15, 16 kilohertz.
Yeah. Are you against the NS10s? Should people stop using NS10s or whatever works?
Whatever works. Yeah, no, whatever works. I used plenty of NS10s back in the day. Whatever floats your boat.
Whatever floats people's boats.
I got some,
but you could pin it down.
I mixed a bunch of records that I'm super proud of the sound of on Sennheiser HD 380s or something, or two, like whatever. I don't care.
Those are headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. People are doing crazy stuff on headphones.
Totally.
Hey everyone, if you've made it this far into the episode, then you're probably a fan of podcasts that help your personal development in the music industry. Former guest of the show and fellow podcaster Travis Ferentz hosts Progressions, a show about finding success in the music business. If you dig Secret Sonics, I have a feeling that you might enjoy his angle too. You can go check it out via the link in the show notes below. So go check it out. All right, back to the episode. Wait, so this is a perfect segue to ask you about hi-fi gear and this kind of new journey in your career and how I'll let you tell it. Tell us a little bit about your journey in hi-fi.
Well, the two have really kind of gone hand in hand, and I wasn't really into the hi-fi stuff for years because I had this real tendency to think, well, I mean, yeah, some of that gear sounds amazing, but that crowd, they just don't know shit about how records are made, and like they buy into all this snake oil, and it's just like, just come on, cable sound, give me I just was so off put by that whole kind of thing, but I sold hi-fi for years in some pretty nice stores, and I was exposed to really great sound. And I would encourage anybody, I think that's a little bit of what's missing in current modern day audio production, is the bar is so low of what a typical engineer hears and thinks is good. You need to get off your ass and find a high-end stereo and go hear some killer system and hear what's possible in playback, and realize that you can get great mixes with whatever tool you use, like NS10s or headphones or whatever. That's fine. But there's a whole other level of enjoyment and resolution of your mixes to be enjoyed on a really super critical, super cool system. And it's not that all of that stuff sounds great. Some of it's very stylized sounding, but there's been an interesting convergence between pro audio production and hi-fi, where like, okay, now more people are mixing on, focals and ATCs and kind of getting away from NS10s, and, nothing against people that still use, those Oratones or the copy of the Oratones, but dude, that happened at a time in the past where there were some car speakers that sounded like Oratones, and like there was console funky table radios. Nobody is going to hear anything that even resembles an Oratone. If you like what it does, but like you're not checking across some broad thing, you're hearing a weird slice that nobody will ever hear. So for me, I would just forget Oratones. They would lead you way too astray. So
if anything, check your iPhone, right?
Yeah, check your iPhone. So, now you get people with ATCs and focals and Genelecs and all that. And then you've got the hi-fi people listening to stuff that's way less stylized. Like it's not so scooped in the middle. It's much more accurate in the mid-range. It's lower in coloration. Which is not to say that all of the pro audio stuff is like super accurate and all of the hi-fi stuff is less colored. I mean, there still exists that there's the delta between the two, but that delta has shrunk a lot. And so in the past, let's say it's like 1982 and I'm in some studio and I'm mixing on, some friggin' JBLs or something, and I'm referencing on NS10s or an Oratone in the middle. And I go, well, that sounds pretty cool. And I check at my totally crappy car stereo and go, all right, it's bright enough, it's cool. And then I make a CD and I go to my local hi-fi store and I like put them on some Martin Logan electrostatics and go, well, that sounds nothing. That sounds like shit. What am I, what am I doing? And then they put on some Bob Clearmountain thing and I go, that sounds pretty badass. What's he doing that I'm not doing? So I can't fault these Martin Logans, even though they're bizarrely different than any record. But now you mix on some ATCs or some Focals or something, and you take to the hi-fi store, and maybe you don't hear them on Martin Logan's, but you hear them on some, a pair of $20,000 super well-designed dynamic drivers. You go, wow, that sounds like what it sounded like in the studio, but even way fucking better. And that's because there's this convergence. And there would be times past when I would dabble with the hi-fi stuff. Like I'd go into stores and listen and go, keep track of what's going on. But I wasn't in that world. I didn't read the magazines. I was not selling it. I was just a full-time mixer. And I would think, I wonder what it'd be like to like actually get some hi-fi speakers that I like the sound of and mix on it. And I experimented with that a little bit. And I was like, no, there's not enough mid-range. They're too delicate. The distortion's too high. Well, hi-fi speakers now are not that delicate and they are very low in distortion because the driver technology has gotten better. So you could, if you got used to it in a fairly short time, pretty much mix on any really good hi-fi two-way that's like $6 or $8 or something, because they're going to be low in coloration. They're made to go loud without a lot of distortion. And the ATC home line is exactly the same as the ATC hi-fi line, as the ATC studio line. They're the same speaker in a utility cabinet. They're not voiced any differently. They're not tuned any differently. So, okay, to circle back. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I met this guy. He's like, would you be interested in writing for this Audiophile online blog magazine thing? I was like, maybe, but I don't know. And so I went to, he said, why don't you come to a show? And so I went to a hi-fi show, and I don't know if I've ever been to a hi-fi show. And I went and listened to the system. I was like, oh shit, this is a lot better than it was 30 years ago or whatever. This is pretty cool. And being a gearhead, was fascinated by the gear and all the stuff. And I'd also known enough to know that there's a little tiny bit of a hi-fi tail in terms of tech that wags the high-end audio. And a lot of that has been in mastering. Like the mastering guys, way before anybody else, started using hi-fi D to A's and A to D's and stuff like that. Like they're like, no, that the commonly available Pro DACs are crap. We can't use, So there's certain tech that's in playback that cross references to audio production that's been researched to a much deeper degree in hi-fi because there's more money at stake and they're more of ear guys. And anyway, so I started reviewing gear and I found that I enjoyed it, and I started getting people sending me stuff. And one of the things that was sent to me was that I heard it at a show in Florida. I heard these speakers, and they're made of granite. And I walked in the morning, and the guy was playing Stairway to Heaven, like the guy that's the head of the company, the designer. I was like, oh, this is cool. It's not this Audiophile bullshit music playing. It's like some real stuff. So I'm set. So he's like, hey, I said, I don't, there's nobody else in the room. It was the morning, and I sat down and I listened, and we got to the point before the quiet part when it's building up to the coda and Robert Plant's voice jumps up the octave. And it's like, I don't remember if it's like after the solo or before the solo, but I heard a tape edit go by. And I went, back it up. Let me hear that again. And we played it again. I was like, that's a fucking tape edit. I never heard that. So I went, okay, this is what you can achieve with resolution of hi-fi speakers that you really can't hear with a Genelec or something. And what it was is you hear, and I don't know whether it was 2-inch or half-inch. It probably was like on the 1/4 inch, but it could have been the 2-inch, or in this case, I don't know what Stairway. It might have been 16 track. I don't know, but it could have been a multi-track edit. It could have been a 2-track edit. But whatever it was, there was 2 giveaways to it. Number one was I instantly heard a quick left to right thing, because at that moment that the tape edit crosses the head, you don't have perfect azimuth because it's cut at an angle. And the tape might be old, it might have been retaped a couple of times. And so even though there's almost no gap between the cut, it does a quick, you see it, you have a super quick left to right like thing that swipes by.
Yeah.
The other thing is it's right before a snare. You always cut on the snare because that's where you can hear it go, and you put the China mark on the snare because it's the easiest thing to hear in a whole mix. So if you're going to cut one take, you're going to cut 2 takes together. It's like, okay, you know what? The end of the coda thing was better on take 3. So let's cut that into take 1 of this. You cut on, you mark that same snare on both takes and then lay the tape on top of each other and make the cut and then put them together. So you don't randomly mark in the middle where it's going, ooh, you go, you do the tape across the heads. You either use the bass drum or the snare. And in a classic rock thing, there's not enough click on the bass drum. The bass drum doesn't go, it just goes, but the snare will go, the snare will go, because it's got top end. And so you can precisely mark where the beginning of the snare is on both takes. And so I heard that go by right before a backbeat when he goes, ba-da-da-da-da, and then he goes with the solo or something. So I went, okay, not only do these speakers sound great, this is the level of resolution that I've heard that song 1,000 times on a zillion headphones in every circumstance. I've never heard that frickin' tape edit. So they sent them to me to review, and I ended up really loving the speakers, both for pleasure listening, and I thought, these might make a good mastering speaker because they're like really flat. There's nothing, there's no tuning for pleasantries, but they're super pleasant to listen to because the distortion is like nothing, and they're super dynamic. They'll play as loud as you possibly want without any distortion. And the imaging is unbelievable. The imaging is beyond, like there's no back wall. The wall behind the speakers just disappears if you play a recording that's got a lot of depth information. So I ended up actually buying that pair that I reviewed for the blog. But I only bought them because, it's a long story. I've told this a couple of times. I'll try and make it really quick. I was going to build my final mastering studio, and I got with Thomas at Northward, and I bought plans, and he consulted. I found a building, and I decided not to do it at the last minute because it was going to cost more than I wanted to spend. And at that point, I just went, why am I doing this? Like, why do I need to do this? I've gotten to the point where, like, I don't need to impress anybody. No clients ever show up. I can't sell it when I'm retired for any money, so I went, okay, I'm not going to build the studio. And, but what's plan B? Well, is it making the garage nicer? And so I thought, all right, I'll make the garage nicer. So I brought all the stuff in from the garage into the living room and went, well, I don't want to bring the big speakers in because I'll just put them off to the side, put some plastic around them. I'm just going to redo the floor. We're going to put some lights in and make it nice. And, so I went, I'll just use these Acora acoustic speakers and see how they work, for the mastering, because they're already in here. And I hooked up my rig. I was like, oh shit, this is like the best sounding room I've ever been in. So that's when I then reached out to Acora Acoustics and said, you know what, you're going to have to give me a price on these. So I now have these 260-pound a piece granite speakers that I use for mastering. And it's a 2.5-way design, which means that it's basically a 2-way with an additional driver that kind of acts as the woofer. In other words, it's not woofer mid-range tweeter. It's like tweeter and woofer, only it's got another woofer that handles a lower area. So
Mm.
it's very coherent, as most two-ways are. And the cabinet has no resonance whatsoever, like none.
Because it's granite.
Because it's granite. So all of the energy is transferred into air motion. And they go super low. I mean, if I have like dubsteps, I mean, I get like 22 hertz in this room. I have a lot of power on them. They don't require a lot of power, but I have 200 watts of Class A. Is a hi-fi amp, same thing. A hi-fi amp I reviewed, and then I said, this is the best amp I've heard on these so far for what I need. I don't want tubes because I want total neutrality, but there's something about these Past Lab amps that's a little bit extra beyond just pure neutrality. And it's not the X series, which are very clear and very neutral and have no vibe. It's the XA series, which, of course, are more expensive, but they have a little added flavor. Nelson Pass added just a tiny little bit of distortion on certain areas so that they sound a little warmer. So that's these XA 200.8. So I have 200 watts of pure Class A on each of the Acora SRC 2s. And it's kind of the greatest system I've ever heard.
That's amazing. And it's in your living room.
and it's in the living room. So what happens, my partner and I, we kind of have a long distance thing, and she spends a little more than half the year here. And then I go out to her place in Seattle, and she came here for the winter. And I went, I got all the crap in the living room. She's like, I'll deal with it. But she's a college professor, and she tapes her lectures on Zoom and stuff. And after a while, I was like, you know what? Not only is it annoying to you, but I want the living room back. And I don't want, what do you think about looking for another house? So we actually bought another house to live in 3 minutes away. So I still live in the same neighborhood, but it's a different house.
Amazing.
And this house is nothing but the gear.
It's the studio house.
It's the studio house. Yeah. And
epic. And for those who aren't watching, right, who are just listening, you're sitting pretty far away from the speakers. Right?
I am. I'm about 8 feet, 8.5 feet, something like that. It looks farther in the picture, but it's not that far. It's like, I'm pretty close. And these speakers, strangely enough, they're not designed to be towed in. They want to point almost directly straight ahead for the best imaging.
Yeah.
But there's no sacrifice in center. The center image is super solid and stable and just floats right in front. But I have the room critically damped. There's enough bounce so that it's not this weird anechoic dry, but I don't have any extraneous early reflections. And I didn't want to use my Sterling Modular double desk, so I had a local guy who lives up the street, who's a friend of mine, that built the clouds and built the treatment back here. I had him build this desk out of birch ply. So I just have a one rack space, and then I've got all the other crap just lower. So the idea is that I don't have to have much in between me and the speakers, and it's low. So
right.
Like this is my head level. And I'll show you, like it's a very unobstructed listening position. It's not quite like if there was nothing in front of me, but to anybody who's experimented with it, if you have nothing in front of you, it always sounds way better than if you have shit in front of you. So
yeah,
I really agree with the whole minimal kind of northward concept of very little in front of you, and let's put the stuff kind of on the sides, kind of low, so it doesn't, reflect. Which is, I think, one reason why a lot of people mixing at home get such amazing mixes, because it's just an IKEA desk and a couple of their speakers and a monitor, and there's not this huge reflective SSL or Neve or something.
Right.
It's like it's almost like it's a less damaging acoustical situation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the younger cats are, just doing that minimal thing. Like, I don't know if you know Jesse Ray Ernster is. He's worked on like the Doja Cat records and stuff. And he's like, I don't know, he keeps his like keyboard on his lap and has like a screen well below the speakers. Like, that would kill my back, but like,
Yeah.
it's working for him.
Yeah.
He's getting great results,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So
I'm also very much an advocate of all in the box mixing. Like I could, but I don't any analog. I like to stay totally digital.
So let's talk about that for half a second. So I mean, I noticed you have like a Sontag and a NIF.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, I guess, hybrid in the box, out of the box.
Okay.
How does that work for you? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I've kind of evolved the system over the years where I really work very hybrid, and I use the analog EQs and compressors and whatnot only if I think it's going to benefit the material. And I used to think, well, I went through a whole evolution of this. Like early on, I like, oh, that's what all the big guys use, so I got to get some cool analog and stuff. But I didn't realize that the level of the converters and the level of the op amps that pass the signal through the gear have to be at a really, really high level, or else you might as well stay digital. In other words, the benefit to the sound of a Sontag versus a DMG equilibrium is not realized unless you have 20 G's worth of conversion and a $15,000 custom console to take nothing off the signal. Like it's got the signal path has to be so unbelievably clean and neutral to realize the importance of some tube compressor or some versus a simulation in the computer, that unless you're ready to throw down and spend a lot of time assembling stuff to get it right, you might as well stay digital. Now, having said that, there are still projects I get where there's not only no benefit to going out and going back in, but it doesn't sound as good at any level. Doesn't matter whether I gain it down, like headroom, like there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just like, I'm losing more than I'm gaining. So I'm just going to stay digital. And I would say I stay completely in the computer about 40 or 50% of the time.
Wow.
And that used to be, there was times when that would be like 80% of the time. And it just it annoyed me because I had all this gear. I'd either like, well, I should just sell all this shit. Why am I even? And then I think, no, I want to have my cake and eat it too. I want to improve the path. So if I want to, I can use the analog stuff. It wasn't a thing of like, I get better results. Like, I don't like looking at the screen, or I don't like the mouse. Like, I don't give a shit about that. I'm just as happy to look at the screen and use a mouse. I don't have to turn knobs. None of that
matters.
Shit to me. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's just what gets me the best sonic results. And there would be, and I would always, a lot of times, if I get a 10-song record or 12-song record, whatever, sometimes I'm just staying digital. This sounds like the Chainsmokers. There's no point. What am I going to do? There's literally why. I'm going to make it mega loud, and I'm going to use a bunch of digital tools to get it to hit harder and all. It's not even really about the EQ. I mean, maybe, but then sometimes I'll get like some Americana record to be like, this could go either way. I'll do one song analog, and then I'll see what it sounds like digital, or I'll compare. I have some ways I can compare on a button of like, or sometimes I go, I'm going to do it digital first and see what I get with that. And then I'll try it analog, but now I kind of already sort of know some EQ points it's going to need. So I'll just dial it up on the Terry or the Sontag, whatever, and go, okay, this is really providing some extra carbonation. There's some vibe here. It's beyond just what I did EQ-wise digital. I'm going to take the time and do this one analog because, it's got to be as great as I can make it. If it's like, it's so close, I just fuck the analog. I don't have to write it down. I'll stay digital. I can do it quicker. I'm going to stay. And I don't really cry about any situation. It's just whatever. If I decide to do it analog, I don't go, I got to write all this stuff down. It's going to take twice as long. I just go, wow, this sounds cool. And I can do it analog. And if it's digital, I just go, wow, this sounds cool. I'm doing it digital. I don't try and
Yeah.
be very unattached.
You're just serving the music. So
Yeah.
that's really what it's about.
Yeah. 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 Now, I'm now to the point where it's very rare I would do all analog. Not unheard of, but if literally, you know what, these mixes sound really good. It just needs a little EQ. And not only that, but the mixes are not very smashed, and the Soundtech or the Terry sounds great on this. I'm just gonna use the Terry on every song. I'm gonna use the Soundtech on every song. Not a lot of stuff to write down. One box, and every song, it needs a little 1700 in the middle on the vocal. Different songs need a little 80, a little 100, whatever. Maybe some 4K on the sides, whatever. And that's it. So that would be kind of example of what I would call a non-hybrid, like an analog session. But more often, I will do a very hybrid kind of thing where I'd be like, okay, these analog tools, I can definitely see I want what they're going to do, but I want what this digital stuff does too. So let's say I go, you know what, I need the bass drum to bump in a way it's beyond EQ. I mean, I can add a little 80 and that's kind of cool, but I need that isotope blah blah blah, or that I need that newfangled audio impactor thing. So then the question is, okay, do I do that on the mix or do I do that post capture? I generally will do it post capture, but I want to monitor it. So what I do is I have like a plugins rack on the track that I'm going to record to, and I listen to what all those plugins are doing on input. So I come out one set of tracks to the analog stuff, do some EQ, whatever, a little compression, whatever, go back in. And on the track that I'm going to go back in and record, before I even record, I can have it sit in record ready and on input. And if it's an ACO driver, which I use, I can have an entire rack on that input track of shit that I'm monitoring. And then I adjust that stuff and get it all right. And then I record. And after I record, I just copy those settings to the region I just recorded. And then uninstantiate that on the monitor and start the process again. Maybe the next tune doesn't need any fancy pants from the digital, Right. That's how I do a hybrid approach. And every once in a while, I'll put something on the mix to be like, all right, there's no harm in just high passing this crazy low end at the on the mix before it even goes out the analog stuff. But I tend to I think of it in terms of the signal flow. Like if I go, okay, I'm going to use a digital de-esser. So I want that after all the other EQ, because I want the de-esser to react to the sum result of all my analog EQ. And, so it's going to be the end of the chain on the virtual rack that's sitting on that channel and input before I record. If you go, there's a whole bunch of stuff about this mix that's kind of harsh and kind of biting and kind of weird. And I want to smooth that out before I start to EQ. So maybe I'll put soothe on the mix, and the mix feeds out to the analog with it already kind of controlled a little bit. And then I do all my analog EQ and compress and shit like that. Right. Or I might say, you know what? I'm feeling a little iffy about that because the signal's going to take a hit. I'll use soothe, but I'm going to use it. If I use it on the mix and they want me to change it, I'll have to instantiate the whole deal. If I put it on the captured mix, I can take it off and won't have to redo all the analog stuff. So sometimes that informs, where it goes.
And so it'll affect how differently you use it, probably.
And sometimes it doesn't, where it is in the chain is not a big enough deal versus I want it to be all virtual. So that's why I rarely will put stuff on the mix.
I understand. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Someone was telling me once how like they use Sooth to kind of like fix, you know, cheap recordings that have just a lot of harsh frequencies or whatever. And then they'll like, you know, but now it sounds a bit anemic now that I fixed all this stuff. And that's kind of where a good thing for analog, analog stuff is good at infusing kind of new saturation into there to kind of make up for that anemicness.
Yeah.
You know?
I will use it on really nice, great, expensive mixes.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. It's not just what can I do to save this kind of thing? It's like, I don't use it as a matter of course, but I will say I use it a lot.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I find like personally, like I find sometimes it works exactly like what I want it to do, and sometimes it's way too much, you know?
It's not super transparent, but if what it's doing, I like more than the loss and resolution, which is about 85% of the time I'll use it.
Wow.
Sometimes I'll go, I really like it dancing all around there and doing all that kind of stuff. But the main issue is that area. And I'll use something more transparent. I'm not going to use Soothe. I'll use DMG multiplicity, and I'll just hone in on that one area. Because the multiplicity is way more transparent.
Yeah.
But it doesn't offset itself. You got to like do all the work.
Right. No, Soothe is very fast. Yeah, it's a crazy plugin.
Yeah.
I'm going back and forth all the time with it of like, do I like this? Do I not like this? It's not something that
I think Soothe 2 is quite a bit better sounding even than the original.
Right. Well, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for walking us through your kind of your system and how it's working for you. It sounds awesome.
Well, before we leave that thing, the other thing I do, which I think is really cool, this is more common now. A lot of guys do this. When I first started doing it, it was a little bit less common. Is I never pound the A to D. So
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
that was on my list of questions.
Along with my little virtual rack of stuff that's sitting in the track where I'm going to record to, is whatever limiter I'm going to use, and there's 3 or 4 different ones I use. I use some more than others, but they all have their place. And I might A/B. It's frequently for me. It's frequent that I A/B toward the end and go, okay, I actually like this one a little bit better. But generally speaking, but the point is that I crank the limiter up like 8 or 10 dB. So for me to get the target level, it's going to have like 5 dB at least of headroom on the A to D. So I'm not going, I'll just kind of go up to the A to D where it gets a little bit of red, and then I'll add another 3 or 4 dB of level in there. No, I got like 10 dB cranked of level in whatever limiter I'm using. So that means if I'm monitoring through that, my entire analog path is going to have max headroom, because I don't need to get even close to the power supply rails or to where it's going to start to get nonlinear. And I found that's especially true of the A to D. Most people would say, well, not only is it cool when I smash it a little bit, it's very inaudible, which I would agree with, but you can never smash it enough to get the level that you really need. You're always going to need a little hamburger helper later. So now you've got kind of ×2, and it's kind of unpredictable. And so I got away from smashing the converter a long time ago. But the other thing that most people don't realize is that I can't say this is true of every converter, but for the prisms that I like to use, they start to change their sound long before the red comes on. You start to get into the yellow, and they compress. So I don't even lighten the yellow. I stay totally in the green. The benefit of that is that it's as punchy as possible on the A to D. I don't want my gear to saturate. I don't want it to reach I don't want it to even get close to seeing some crazy fucking plus 28 dB. It's all the gear is running basically like analog console level circa 1984, and because that's what it's designed for. None of this shit is designed for digital level. It's not designed for the extra 10 or 12 dB. It's just not. So occasionally I might use the VacuVox and put them into high gain mode and get them to do a thing, but that's within themselves. And I still compensate by having the whole throughput unity gain. Like I'll turn the output down and do that kind of stuff. But this whole thing of like fine tuning how hard you're going to hit your analog stuff like that, to me, that's just utter bullshit. You need to maintain as much headroom as possible and then gain the fuck out of it in the computer.
Yeah. Do you, when you are limiting, are you just doing it with one limiter usually, or do you stack limiters inside the computer?
I don't stack much. No, it's just one. I mean, sometimes two, but not that much. I use more soft clippers or hybrid soft clip with a little bit of brick wall, or I usually trade distortion for, I'd rather have the punch and the added distortion. So I'll use a regular brick wall if it's like piano and vocal. It's like, if I'm not going to give up anything, there's no drums, well, then I'll just use a brick wall. But the minute there's anything percussive, I'll generally reach for one of the 2 or 3 kind of soft clipper type things. So the other mindset that I realized that was taught to me, I think this was probably Ted that really kind of like drilled this in. I was working on something one day at Sterling or something, and I saw him in the kitchen. I was like, there was a certain point where I'd go like, I just can't get this thing any louder than this because it's really starting to sound shitty and it's really scratchy and it's forget the distortion. It's just sonically really starting to get too edgy and too brittle. And not only that, but I really can't listen to it more than just really super quiet, And I saw Ted Jensen in the Sterling in the kitchen one day. He was like, "What's going on?" I was like, "I got this, whatever I'm working on. I forget what it was, helmet or something, some metal thing." And I said, "Yeah, I can't get it loud." And I said, "I can't get it. I can't listen to it very loud because it's just so ratty." He's like, "Well, then you need to make it not sound ratty so you can listen to it loud." And that's a simple concept, but I think the difference between like the really experienced guys and the higher level guys versus the guys that have good ears, but they're kind of haven't done it quite as long, is I know I had a tendency during those days to go, well, I can't get it to do this thing. And the really great guys are like, there's a way I can get this as loud as they're going to want to be and still sound pretty good. And I just need to do it rather than go. And I need to be able to listen to it moderately loud and not have it take my head off. So that's what I'm going to make it do. So I don't listen loud anymore, but there was a time where I listened moderately loud. But the reason that you want to listen moderately loud is that you want to be able, if you get something that's really egregious, you're like, well, I just have to defang this because it's got to work at level. So the same experience that produces the consciousness to go, I know in 10 seconds there's nothing to do to this, even if it doesn't sound absolutely perfect. Anything I would do is going to upset the apple cart. So this one stays the same. That same experience also produces, okay, I'm having problems getting this one loud. The answer is not putting an L2 on it and just accepting whatever, or the answer is not delivering it loud, turning my monitor down. The answer is I have to do some shit to this to make it go loud and not have it sound like ass. And if you just got to figure out how to do it.
So it's the years gives you that kind of Jedi knowledge of not doing this.
I'm only relating it not because this eggshell burst on me like yesterday, but this is a long series of these milestones where I thought, I kind of know what's going on. And they're like, no, you don't, because there's this other thing you don't realize. It's like one thing of one other mastering engineer saying, well, if you can't turn it up loud, you need to make it sound so you can turn it up. You need to make it sound better so you can turn it up loud. That's like,
just like opened up the world for you.
Yeah. So, and, Scott and all the guys at Sterling all equally had moments that lasted one sentence or conversations or whatever that made me kind of go, oh, okay.
Right.
One of Scott's biggest things that I'll never forget is there's no one right way to do it. You just have to get within the window of the 4 or 5 or 6 versions that all sound pretty good. Don't obsess about getting the exact perfect. Just get it in the ballpark of acceptability and send it back out,
Right.
And that's what kind of helps you not be continually in this kind of mindset of oh, but one more little, once you get to I wonder if it'll take you, stop. No, you don't need to wonder. It sounds great. You're just going to undermine the process.
Yeah. I feel like it's just like that doing it and repeating that task and doing those reps over and over again and just not overthinking it and just getting those reps in. It's like the people that are too perfectionistic at the beginning of a process and they never make anything in the end because they can't even get that first record out, versus the people that just put out and eventually something amazing happens.
Or they they put out. And if you go back, the early stuff, with my mastering, the early stuff doesn't sound good. It's not good, but it was okay. But I wasn't doing it as a hobby. I had to pay for food and rent and stuff. So I was like, well, I got to put this out. So that's why I picked people that would probably not be heard by a lot of people.
Right.
So that I could learn.
Right, but you put in those reps.
Yeah.
And you did the best you could, given the circumstances.
I did the best I could, and sometimes I go back, and every once in a while I'll go. Now it's streaming, I don't have to search through closets for a CD that I might have lost. I got oh, what about that thing I did 25 years ago? Put it up. Sometimes it's just oh, wish I could redo that one. And other times it's well, it doesn't sound so bad, I never know.
You could go in either direction.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I have another question, 2 questions that I want to ask you before I let you go today, because these are questions I ask everybody. So, there's days that we're all getting to the studio, super pumped to do our job and do the thing we do. But, there's days also where we're less inspired. Do you have any habits, routines, anything that you do that kind of keeps you in that good headspace to do the work that you need to do?
Sure. Well, I like to stay as healthy as I can. I mean, I will be the first to I hate exercising and I hate all the stuff that you got to do to kind of maintain a healthy lifestyle. But I really make myself walk in the morning and, ride my bike as much as I can. I do a workout twice a week with a trainer guy who's great. And I eat well, I don't drink anymore. I quit drinking years ago. I really love doing this. And so I want to stay as healthy as I can, to do it as long as I can. I don't know if I do it so much to get inspired to do the work because I'm really, really lucky. I mean, if I have a good project that I know I'm going to enjoy the music, I want to get up in the morning and make some coffee and run to the studio and start working immediately. But I kind of try and temper that with, yeah, but you kind of get those a lot. You'll just gain 75 pounds and start to have high blood pressure if you don't not jump up immediately and go to the studio every morning. And, you got to keep your workout schedule and keep eating healthy. And, but I want to just, eat ice cream every night and never walk. But I don't. I try. So, and I also do a lot of meditation. There's times where I'm kind of into it more than others. I'm currently not I haven't made time for the meditation, but that's very important to me. So really just, take some time to kind of meditate and get good sleep. Yeah. It's just the basics, exercise,
right,
eat well and get good sleep,
Yeah, these are things that I'm not enjoying so much with 2 little kids.
Yeah.
But hopefully as they get older, we'll figure out how a new balance.
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. We if we want to stick it out for the long game, right? Because it's
Yeah.
longevity is something that, thankfully you've already
I love doing
basically achieved.
I
It's
love
amazing.
doing it. I mean, I started to think, yeah, maybe I should kind of semi-retire. And it's not like, what would I do? I had plenty of things I do, and I would keep busy. I'm not going to like go and watch TV and make cookies. But I just love this stuff so much that I think probably what's going to happen is I probably start working less days a week and spend the other days doing more hi-fi stuff or more travel, or more travel with hi-fi related stuff, or I don't know. But yeah, I'm going to be, I don't think I'm ever going to like entirely.
You're gonna be rocking the audio forever.
I'm going to be rocking the audio right up to the closing the casket. It's weird. I don't know. I I don't know why it's a constant source of fascination. Partly because I love music and I love hearing the music. But I mean, if I'm really honest, it's not as much about the music as it is about the sound. I really love a great sounding mix, a great sounding music. Occasionally, those two things, if I listen to some artist I love, like Peter Gabriel or some jazz thing or something, I can get into the music, but I'm kind of like, I'm a little bit too, my initial love of music as a teen is kind of, I love it more intellectually than anything else. It's very hard for me to get a, like you see a lot of mastering people or like mixed people say, I want to just communicate the emotional thing of the music. It's like, well, for some audio technicians, that may be true. I think for a lot of them, that's kind of a cop out and kind of bullshit. No, you don't want to communicate the emotion. You just want everything to sound good. And that's how you think it's great. Like, but if you were really all about communicating the emotion, this and that, you'd have half your clients rewrite the lyrics, or you'd be like, it's like,
right. Yeah.
You're not there to, nobody that listens to the tune is going to have a reaction from no reaction to all of a sudden falling in love with the tune on an emotional basis because you put some reverb on the vocal. Like, don't make you're ascribing too much importance to your thing,
Right.
So I'm not saying it's wrong if you say, well, I'm here to serve the music and give it more of an emotional reaction and have the listener react to it deeper and all that kind of stuff. That's like a notch on your volume control. You want somebody to react to it more, just tell them to turn it up a little bit. Like, you can't understand half the words in the entire Stones catalog. Do you think people would have a deeper emotional connection with the Stones if you could hear Mick better or whatever, or if the drums hit harder or something? No, it's like, I think there's buzzwords that engineers like to use rather than saying, I'm just really into sound and I just really want it to sound really good to me.
Yeah.
I think that's about 90% of engineers, although they just don't like to admit it.
Yeah, but sometimes when you make it sound better, it does cause your skin to get goosebumps. And
I will admit that. And I do get that feeling on, I've cried on stuff I've mastered. There's a couple times, once or twice a year, I'll cry on something. And
that's amazing.
yeah, I'll get misty at home every now and then if I hear something. But yeah, I am always kind of trying to look for that innocent, naive fix when I was 16, when I would listen to music and just really get into it. But it only hits like that every once in a while. But I keep chasing that.
We listen all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it's just a confluence of like whatever you've been going through, and then a specific song comes on with a specific lyric that you didn't even realize you related to so much. And
yeah,
I had a moment like that this week.
Yeah. Oh man, I've been. I have been there. I shouldn't be so, blatantly downplay the impact of the artistry, because I mean it gets me too. It definitely gets me too. But yeah, I guess what I'm kind of rebelling against is the mastering guys that say, "Oh, we're trying to increase the emotional intensity in the listener," or whatever. And I like, they're either going to like the tune or not, dude. Whether it's a little brighter or not, nobody cares.
It's like we do the best we can, but whatever.
I'm going to have if I'm going to have an emotional reaction, I can have it on a jam box playing a cassette. It doesn't have, if I'm going to truly have an emotional reaction to the music, it could be the lowest fidelity. And I'll be like, damn, that James Brown is funky as shit. Yeah,
because if somebody said this once on the show, if it smacks through a phone, then it smacks. So like whatever.
That's right.
If the song is there, it's there.
That's right.
It's in the material.
Yeah.
Epic. Oh my God, Dave, there's so much I could talk to you about. This has been such an informative conversation. I really learned a ton.
Thanks.
And I love what you're doing. And
people
should just go check out your records. And some of the records I was listening to before we got on the call included The Snarky Puppy and Charlie Hunter.
I'll tell you some other records I'm really proud of the sound of. I really like, I've done a lot of stuff with an Austin singer-songwriter named Bob Schneider. I really like Bob's stuff. And those are projects that I've mixed and mastered.
Oh, I'll definitely check that out.
Bob Schneider. He's got a lot of stuff you can stream. But yeah, a lot of times in these, it's like, what is can you think of a couple of projects that really, I can't, it's too many that just, yeah. And when I'm listening at home, the stuff I generally check out is not stuff I've worked on. It's like other people's stuff. I love Chad Blake mixes. I love, other people's kind of stuff. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, dude, it's a total pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I will ask you the final question of the show, though.
Sure.
One last question before I let you go. And if you've listened to the show, which you have, you know what's coming. But just looking back on your journey, was there something that you did or didn't do that you'd want to impart on the listener, either on your earlier self or the listener who's more early on in their journey, of be like, yo, Dave, that's the one thing you got to keep at. It's going to get you where you want to go. Or Dave, stop doing that. It's holding you back. What would be that one thing?
I would say that, audio engineering is such a difficult career that I was very much one of those engineers that, I thought, oh yeah, you're bad. Your stuff sounds good and all that, whether it was the early days of recording or mixing, but at the same time, I would have kind of an inferiority complex. And I would not say an imposter complex, because I never thought like, oh, I'm fooling people. I would used to think, I would think, I know my shit. My shit sounds good, but I would be insecure. At the same time, I would say, yeah, I think my mixes sound good. I'd be like, yeah, but they're not really as good as so-and-so. So I'm not going to go for that gig because I'm not really good enough for that, So I would say confidence and not being afraid to fail is something that can really hold a lot of people back. And at the very least, if you are able to reach out to somebody and talk to somebody into using you maybe you're at a journey in your mixing or your mastering, or be like, I kind of need to do some free stuff to kind of get some more experience and to get known, or some very inexpensive stuff. And at the same time that I said, I kind of had enough consciousness not to reach out to really big name people that probably would have given me a shot. I think I can see a situation where a lot of people would hold themselves back to just kind of doing their own stuff or staying at home or fooling around with it when they really I really want to quit this bank job and do this full time, but they're afraid to reach out to somebody to work with because they think they're not good enough yet. And I think that the only way you can get better is to actually put yourself in real situations. And so I don't know if I would tell myself to do that more, but I think that fearlessness was one of the things that helped me the most kind of in my journey. I would just kind of be like, yeah, I've never worked in the studio. I've never worked on that console, but there's a 14-piece thing that they want to hire me to do. Yeah, I'll just go in there and I'll figure that shit out. I was just fearless, and sometimes I failed, sometimes I didn't, but I would never shrink from an opportunity to like. I would get nervous, I'd be like, "Oh shit, I don't know how to." Okay, deep breaths. I got to figure. I can figure this out, but I would never not put myself out there because I was too insecure. But there was times where I held myself back because I felt like it's too scary to do that. And so I guess trying to strike a balance between putting yourself out there in a scary situation and spending a little more time honing your craft without showing your cards. If that makes any sense. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like, taking risks, not being afraid of failing is something I totally resonate with because, we're kind of taught in school you don't want to fail. So sometimes it's better to play it safe, but it's in real life, you're better off, failing in even a gig is not a big deal because it's not like a life or death situation or anything. You know what I mean? It's just a gig that you fucked up. So
I was always deathly afraid of like looking bad and like, oh my God, I'm going to come off like I just don't know. And I had to suppress that a lot of times and go, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out. Somebody, like nobody's going to die because I didn't know how to hit record.
It's not open heart surgery.
Yeah.
It's just audio. Yeah, no, totally. And I resonate with that because I feel like there's definitely times still to this day that I'm afraid of failing and I don't go far enough. So thanks for sharing that. I'm learning to embrace failure slowly.
Like, and what would you think that maybe you could sort of put yourself out on a limb for now that maybe you were too cautious before? Give me an example of what, like.
I mean, I think I need to figure out a way to reach out to the artists that I really want to work with rather than artists that are finding me and kind of manifesting, working on the kind of music that I'm more passionate about. And also maybe doing less gigs that are maybe easy to come by, but are not necessarily the music I want to work on. And also maybe getting more into mixing and less into kind of the production stage, that kind of stuff. These are things that I'm afraid of doing because then what if I cut off an income revenue, stream, which I need because I got 2 little kids.
Right.
Versus what if I'm doing this, shouldn't I be just doing this,
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
That's a tough question to answer. And I did 2 things. I put off having kids as long as I possibly could. And I put off getting married as long as I possibly could. And I was very stubborn about, in the beginning, I would take anything. I don't care what your thing is. I want to learn. But there was a point where I did get to where I would be like, I'll do that because I really need the gig, but I don't want to do any of those anymore, And I can remember when I shifted from mixing and recording, into mastering, I got a call from a well-known A&R guy for a famous artist to go to their studio and record. I went, you know what? I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just mastering. And there was a couple of those situations. And
wow,
it wasn't like I was making a fortune mastering, but I was just like, this is just going to take me further away from where I really want to be with this thing. There was also a point in time where I just thought, if I just do really great work, everybody will know me and find me and come and get me. And I was like, no, you really kind of have to be proactive. But yet I don't really want to promote myself in this kind of egregious way where I talk about how good I am and all the cool people I've worked with. So like, that doesn't feel authentic and doesn't feel right. So I'm just going to figure a way to do social media that I feel is authentic, but yet puts the word out. And sometimes it's like little things. It's like, and I will go after stuff too. Like on my Instagram, I put a lot of stuff in the messages that go away after a few days, the stories. And anytime I put music up there of somebody that's not iconic, like Jimi Hendrix or Zeppelin or something like that, anytime it's like somebody you don't really know, it's something I mastered, but I don't put mastered by me. I just like, here, check this out,
Yeah.
And also, if I hear something on social media that I like, well, that's badass. Those guys I love those tunes, and that guy's good. So usually it's like a mixer or maybe it's an artist. I'll reach out to him and be like, dude, I'm no shortage of work. Believe me, I'm not looking for a gig, but your shit is so good. If the next time around you're looking for somebody, you want to try somebody different, man, I would dig the shit out of working with you guys, And most of the time that's worked out pretty well. And so that does two things. It will help new stuff come in that you might end up, making some money, but it gradually shifts your clientele towards stuff that you really like the music.
Right.
And you don't have to sort of tell people to go away. I never tell people like, I'm not doing that stuff anymore. I just get too busy
with the stuff that you do want to do.
Stuff that I do want to do.
It just takes time. It takes time to do that stuff. And I mean, it's obvious. Obviously, it takes a little bit of time, but yeah, it's hard in the day-to-day grind of raising little kids.
I know.
To be proactive.
Man, believe me, my heart goes out. I know exactly. I remember sitting on the couch with
no regrets, right? Like I love my kids.
I remember I love my kids. I mean, I remember sitting on the couch with my firstborn, a boy named Darby, and I'm sitting there, and I was used to just like being on the scene all the time. Like, I'm going to the club. This band's are rehearsing, and I got to go see this band, and I'll go to this other studio when I'm not even working on the project because I know the engineer and this band's cool. Like I was on the scene, and I remember the first time, when the first kid came along, I'm sitting on the couch, watching Lion King for the 50th time. He's like a year old. I'm like, well, I guess my career's over doing this music stuff.
Yeah.
And, of course that didn't happen, but.
Right. Stages,
Yeah.
There's seasons and stages in life. So
yeah,
it's important to figure out what you can do and shouldn't do in different stages. But
it's hard when you're in it. It's so easy to look back. Like I make it sound like it's so easy, but dude, when I was in the middle of all these various struggles and situations, I'd be like, I almost quit music like 5 times.
Wow.
I'd be like, I can't do this anymore. I can't make any money. God have to declare bankruptcy. I had to declare bankruptcy like, I don't know, 25 years ago or something. Like
shit.
It's not as easy, it's not as it's hard. And I don't have to tell anybody who's out there struggling, but the people that have quote unquote made it, there's always stories of adversity.
Right. So you gotta find that adversary faster. So you get past it.
Yeah. I don't know.
Lean into it.
Yeah. My only guiding principle was I just enjoyed it too much to stop doing it. So I just had to find a way that I could keep doing it. And I never wanted to be, famous or have all awards. Like I didn't give a shit about that. I still don't care about it. I don't have anything framed. It just sits in storage. I don't care. But you only get that stuff if you just continue to do it. And so my other advice would be don't give up if you feel like this is for you. And don't give up if, regardless of how difficult it is, don't let those bastards get you down. Like you just, I would be in deep depression in years past about like, oh, I'm better than that motherfucker. And why is he getting the gigs and stuff? And that's normal. That's just human, Yeah. It's almost as confronting a career as trying to be an actor. It's not quite as bad as acting, but it's a close it's a close second to acting, I think.
That sounds about right to me. My sister's an actress, and I don't envy her because it's like as tough as my thing is, hers seems even harder.
Oh, listen,
because she's also dependent on like other people, like way more than I am. Like she needs
ex-wife,
a whole cast.
My ex-wife is an actress. She's a drama professor now. But I remember we were first married, and she be in between. There'd be long episodes in between plays or indie movies or something, and she'd say, "I need to take a class." I'd be like, "You have an MFA in acting. You've been in these movies. What do you need to take class?" And she'd be like, and then I got it. I was like, oh, if you're an actor, you have to pay someone to be able to do your thing unless you get hired. You can't even practice your guitar by yourself. You have to pay
That's hard.
someone
It's crazy.
to be in a class so you can act.
It's so tough.
Think about that.
Yeah. No, we have it easy compared to them.
I know. Oh, man.
We have it hard compared to almost every other profession, but compared to that profession.
Oof, I know.
Yes.
Well, man,
that's awesome.
I didn't mean to keep you up any later, but
No, it's good, man. This is great. This is it always my podcasts tend to linger on towards the end, but we touched on so many things, and I think everyone's gonna dig this episode. So, Dave, thank you for all you're doing. Thanks for coming on the show, and keep up the great work. And I hope to schmooze again soon. At some point.
Absolutely, yeah. Call me anytime or hit me up on IG and questions. Always.
I appreciate it. Really appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, man. We'll talk soon.
All right. You take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.